Hey, hi guys, welcome. My name's Cagney Collins. I am the Director of Education for the Ohio Beef Council. So it looks like today we have Miss McCrae's class from Sciota Career and Technical joining us.
Hello, sorry, we turned the lights off so we could see the smartboard better.
It's okay. And then we have Miss Haven's class from West Liberty Salem High School.
Say hi.
All right, now we have Miss Horner's class from Sentinel. And we have Mr. Ward's class from Sydney.
Hey.
All right, so just a couple of housekeeping things. So we will be doing a live Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to come up to the camera or wave your arm and we can try to get those answered as soon as possible. But if you look, there's also a chat box that feel free to throw your questions in there. So today we are at the Ohio State University and we're working with Dr. Lyda Garcia. And so we're really excited about this virtual farm tour. This is something we've never done before about meat science. So we'll let Lyda take it from here.
Hey guys, well, it's really good to see you guys today, and I really enjoy the enthusiasm that I saw from Tiffin. And so I just want to say welcome. You know, right now we are in the Department of Animal Sciences here, and one of the programs that we offer here is the meat science program, which is very unique, you know, because not just every university has a meat science program, but today I'm going to take you through the meat lab and take you into my world just a little bit, and I hope just enough to get your attention to want to take an interest in meat science. Now, what we're going to do today is we're actually going to go into the meat laboratory. Now, there's four areas in this meat lab. There's a processing area, there's a fabrication area, there's a cooler area, and then we have what we call the harvest floor, or also known as the slaughter floor. And so for biosecurity, we're also going to start in what we deem as the clean area. You'll see that it's not that we have a dirty or a clean site technically. It all pertains to the actual process. So come on in, don't get too cold as we go in there. So one thing that I'll share with you is, you know, right here what we're looking at is we're starting out here as in the processing room. This processing room has everything to do with taking muscle cuts and reducing them in size. That's the whole definition of processing. And so here we actually are federally inspected. We actually are considered very, very small scale, you know, compared to our industry. And a lot of the equipment that you'll see here is actually being used in large scale industry. The only difference is that because we don't have the volume here, because we're more of an educational institution first, our equipment's going to be a little bit smaller. Now, we do have undergraduate students who are employed by this meat lab. Hours of production are at 6 a.m. and they end at 2:30. We work with the students along with their schedules, and they actually will learn how to operate a lot of these machineries. So let me show you a couple before we move on. This right here is what we refer to as a multi-needle injector. As you can see, there are multiple needles right along here, and you'll notice the springs that we have here and a lot of the hoses. The whole point to this multi-needle injector is to actually inject a water-based solution. And by default, because we're actually injecting, these needles are penetrating through the actual meat cuts, we actually are making the product more tender. So what types of products do we actually run through here? Well, we can run a brisket, we can run a belly for bacon, you know, for pumped bellies, we can run a whole ham for deli hams. The sky's the limit. Whatever you want to pump with a water phosphate nitrite solution, this is it right here. Now, this big machine right here this is what we refer to as the Hotman stuffer. This is a sausage stuffer. This is where we'll stuff our bratwurst, our just regular sausage, our breakfast sausage. We'll also just do regular hot dogs. This is a very, very expensive machine, very powerful. I think this is one of the ones that our students really like to use the most. We also have grinders here. Now, this is a smaller grinder, but we do a lot of ground beef products, a lot of sausage, you know, anything that needs to be ground will go through this. We have mixers. We have, as you see right here, deli slicers. Let's see, here on this back side, we actually have a beef patty machine. We actually have a store. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but we do have a meat shop where customers can come into our meat lab and purchase whatever they want when it comes to meat products. This is our beef patty machine. Now, the uniqueness of this machine is that it will spit out beef patties in the shape of squares, just like Wendy's. This is our 2-chamber vacuum packaging machine. We actually will place the bags, the vacuum bags in here along with the product. And once we actually, here you go, turn it on for you. You can hear the power of these machines. I mean, these aren't toys to be played with and to take lightly. Again, a lot of our students will learn how to work these machines. So, I'm sorry, going back to the vacuum machine, by the time we pull vacuum, when I say pull vacuum, by the time we remove the oxygen from that product, there's less than 1% oxygen left, and which is really, really beneficial to the meat product because that means that it has a longer shelf life. Right over here, we have another packaging machine that we primarily use for research. This is the modified atmospheric packaging machine. This is where we'll flush it with carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and oxygen, and that really helps with that shelf-stable properties of that meat product. If you follow me into this next room over here, which is the second area, this is actually our fabrication room. So what do I mean by fabrication? That means that we will take the carcasses, as you can see all these rails right over my head and all over the place. We will take the actual carcasses and place them on tables, and then we'll start separating them from primal parts. So primal just means the primary parts of that carcass. So for a beef carcass, the primary parts that consist of the round, sirloin, loin, rib, and chuck, right? And then we'll take it even further from a primal to a subprimal, and then eventually retail, which would consist of roast and steaks and kebabs and all that good stuff. Just like in that other room, we have a lot of equipment, again, to mirror image large-scale industry. We have bandsaws, we have knives, we have hand saws. Our students learn how to sharpen knives because a dull knife is a very, very, very dangerous weapon, only because it's too dull. There's more of an effort, more force, and often leads to accidents. So our students are the ones who run this. We guide them, but we teach them. The whole point of this kind of hands-on application is ever they want to join the meat industry, they will be well equipped with the fundamentals and maybe with a little more. One thing that I'll share with you is you notice that I'm wearing a white coat or a frock, sorry, and a coat underneath. The temperature in this room right now is about 34, 35 degrees. The primary reason for that is food safety. Bacteria begin to replicate or start to grow at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The cooler that we can keep it, the colder, the better in reducing any type of cross-contamination and growth of bacteria. Let's go on over to the cooler. And you're in luck today because I know this is a beef program, but we actually have pork carcasses in the cooler. We just harvested about 19 hogs on Friday. This is all for our Introduction to Animal Sciences labs that we do have coming up this week, actually by tomorrow. So our students will learn how to evaluate pork carcasses. They'll learn how to fabricate, again, starting with the primal parts. I will assign them prices for each primal part, and then they will weigh it. Based on how well their workmanship skills are, will determine whether they made money or not, right? So our students today, this afternoon, as you can see that these carcasses are still hanging on the gambrel. We're going to what we call single rail them so that we can start taking one side at a time. Come on over to the harvest floor. It's a little bit warmer in here. So this is what we refer to as our harvest floor or also slaughter floor. Once again, this isn't necessarily considered to be a dirty area. This is just in the whole process, the grand scheme of things. This is probably just most likely where we'll find more of that bacteria only because of the hide. It's just like hair. Hair tends to trap things if it rains, if it snows, if it's muddy. They've been traveling on that trailer, sometimes they'll defecate on one another. So this is where the harvest will occur. Now, if you notice, we have a lot of equipment, but one thing that I do want to share with you is if you take a notice of this this chute right here, this is actually our cattle chute. This is where cattle come through. They will run through here and we'll raise that bar. And as soon as they come through, we'll put that bar right on their neck. That's what we call a head restrainer. Here in the state of Ohio, there is a zero tolerance for double stunning. Now, when I talk about stunning, that means that we render the animals unconscious. That's the law. It is to follow two of the rules of the five freedoms of welfare. And the two that we have to follow here is that the animals shall be free from fear and free from pain. This is stunning them accounts for the free from pain rule of the five freedoms of welfare. So once they are stunned, they're rolled out onto the side, and then we will hoist them. We'll put a chain around their back hock. We'll hoist them, meaning we'll raise them, and then we will sever the jugular vein and carotid artery. And then we'll start the whole process from there. But please understand that stunning is very important with what we do. Unless we're talking about ritual slaughter, which deals with halal and kosher, those are two different ball games. Another piece of equipment that we have here is what we call the deher and scalder. This is for hogs. Now, in this tank, we will fill with hot water ranging from 141, 143 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we will add a powder that we call Obaldi. That Obaldi helps to loosen the hair follicles. So if you stop and think about it, that hot water is going to open up that skin pore. Then that Obaldi, that powder, is going to help loosen the hair follicle. And then inside, we have rotating paddles that are going to remove that hair, because we all know nobody likes to eat hair. So this is a machine that helps us with hogs. Now, the machine right over here, this is also a scalder, but for broilers, for turkeys, and so forth. Here in our meat laboratory, again, we are federally inspected. We are set up to do beef, pork, lamb, goat, and poultry, avian as well. So even on the slaughter floor, as I mentioned about clean and dirty, even if I were to draw a line right down the middle of this whole floor, the portion to my left would be deemed as the dirty side, but the portion to my right would be deemed the clean side. This is usually the carcass wash side, and also a lot of the paperwork when it comes to HACCP, which is the food safety plan that accounts for checks and balances and making sure that we do everything right in regards to food safety. So here we have it. This is our slaughter floor. I'm going to take you back to our holding pens that we have. And just like in any facility, we do have holding pens. You can see we have three main areas. The larger area is more intended for cattle, for larger species. On the far right corner, we have usually intended for lambs. And then my far right over here, usually intended for swine. And so it is important that when these animals are dropped off or unloaded, we give them rest time. Usually in the industry, cattle will have about 45 minutes of rest time. Swine, lambs, roughly an hour to an hour and a half. Now here at Ohio State University, what we do is we arrange them to arrive the day before. And so, and by law, they have to have full access to water. So we have a lot of water pans around here for them to drink at all times. So that resting period is pretty important, only because that helps them calm down. You know, I mean, let's be real. If I put you in a bus and didn't tell you where you were going, I think you'd be pretty stressed too. So there you have it. Here we have at the Ohio State University's meat laboratory. Once again, we are a federally inspected facility. Everything that we do here, we sell. A lot of our meat lab is run by our students. They do get paid for it as student workers, and guided by our meat lab manager and by some of the faculty who are involved. So I think that's where we're going to wrap up. I think this is a good time for any questions as we rotate from here back to the classroom.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions so far? Yep.
Who do you sell the meat? Like, who do they sell the meat to? Like
Anybody?
a grocery chain or?
Well, a part of our, we are contracted with the Blackwell Hotel here on campus. They will get some of our products, from our ground beef, our hot dogs, bacon, things like that. But we do also offer the meat shop to anybody. The public is what I'm referring to. So if you were going to be in town and you wanted to buy a few steaks, you know, for a football game or what have you, you would just go to our website, and there's an order sheet on there, and you would talk to our secretary, and she will arrange the order, and then you guys arrange a pickup date.
Yeah, Scioto, you guys have a couple questions? So one question they asked is, where do the animals come from? That you,
Perfect.
yeah.
No, that's a very, very good question. Now, we do have our own facilities. We have a beef facility, swine facility, lamb facility, and even poultry facility. And we actually have 5 facilities here throughout the state of Ohio. I will tell you that usually when I'm requesting livestock, I will go to Don Scott here in Columbus. It's right by the airport, or we will call or pull from Caldwell or Jackson or maybe even Worcester. But I would say 95% of the livestock that we that run through our meat lab is from our own facility.
All right. Mr. Ward, do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, we had a student here that was wondering what method do they use for, I mean, obviously it might depend on the type of species, but method for killing or terminating the animal. Yeah.
For stunning, right. So with beef and lamb and goat, we will use a mechanical stunner. So we actually have a captive bolt that just has a spring right at the very tip, and then we'll use an MC-22 shell that will just, once we pull a trigger, a rod will run through and it will render the animal unconscious. Now, swine are a bit different. We actually use electrical shock. We actually have a wand that has 2 spurs at the very end, and we'll just place that one behind the ears. Of course, we'll wet them down because, as we know, water is a good conductivity of electricity. But also, even though we don't do it here, the industry will also use carbon dioxide and basically just put them like in a carousel type in a I would say a big holding pen cage kind of thing, and then submerge them in about 90% carbon dioxide where they just fall asleep. So, but here in our meat laboratory, we use mechanical stunning and electrical.
Thank you very much.
All right, you're good to go.
All right, so are you guys able to see the slides? So today, I was really, really impressed, just because one thing that I'll usually ask my, with these programs is who my audience is. And I've learned that now, you guys are a combination of FFA students, students who come from an agricultural background, which I assume is in livestock. And then we also have culinary. So one thing that I wanted to do was just try to put something together and maybe that would fit everyone. And so my topic today is going to be the impacts of marbling on tenderness. Now, let me ask you a quick question, and I hope you can type really fast, is what is marbling? Have you heard of it? And if you have, how would you explain it to somebody?
The group at West Liberty Salem says intramuscular fat.
Uh-oh, sounds like you're a bit more educated than the average. You're absolutely right. But now let me take that further, West Liberty. What does intramuscular mean?
Okay, say it. In the muscle.
Absolutely. Well, then I don't need to give my presentation. You already know this, right? So here's the thing. So as in going into my next slide, just a quick background of who I am. I mean, I just kind of showed up and here I was, right? I've only been here for about 4.5 years. I hail from Texas. All my schooling is in Texas. I'm originally from South Texas. Grew up about 40 miles east of the Texas-Mexico border, but was educated just about in every region I could possibly imagine. I did start out college going on a full ride scholarship to judge livestock. And so that was probably the portal that started my college journey. So I went to a 2-year school, judged livestock, but then I also ran into meat judging too. And I'll tell you, meat judging and I we were a perfect marriage. I dropped livestock, went into meats. I've been faithful to meats ever since. And then I continued in my meat science career after JUCO. I did go to Texas Tech University where I was able to achieve my 10-year dream of being a Red Raider. Went for my master's at West Texas A&M, coached the meets team there, and then I wrapped up with the Aggies down in College Station, Texas, where I also coached the meets team, and then went back to Texas Tech to do a 1-year postdoc. So basically, I wasn't faculty, but I wasn't a student. That was my time to really learn on what a faculty member does. And then I was on faculty for about the next 4 years. And then I just decided to leave home, wanted to branch out, and then I landed here in Ohio. And I'll tell you, it's probably been the best decision I've made in a very, very long time, because I really, really do enjoy it here in Ohio. So here in Ohio, at Ohio State University, I oversee the undergraduate meat science program, and I try to corrupt as many students as I can to come into the meat world with me. I think it's a pretty neat arena. Now, one thing, meat science is a very unique topic, subject matter. And one thing that I really want to share with you is the true definition of meat science. And as you could see, the very simple definition consists of nothing more than a study of characteristics of meat and other animal tissues as they are transformed into meat. Too many times, and this is even with my own mother, she will say meat science has to do with butchering, and and that's just a stigma I think that we have. But I'll tell you, there's just so much more involved with meat science. This is just in confounding factors of meat science. There are so many subject matters, so many topics to talk about that I don't have time to hit every single one of them in one semester. I'm currently teaching an introduction to meat science class right now, and I'll tell you there's never enough time to cover everything because the discussions that we have, especially those who are in agriculture, really, really take up a lot of good time. But these are just some of the subject matters. As you can see, food safety and microbiology and inspection. I'll tell you, food safety is very, very critical to what we do. We do the best that we can to put some intervention steps in place to try to reduce or eliminate as much bacteria pathogens as possible. And then it goes all the way to carcass evaluation, to pricing, degree of doneness. But at the end of the day, it's about that consumer. Now, the next slide that I have is just a brief summary of our beef industry. Now, you'll notice that it starts from calving and all the way down to the retail sale. I have a very serious question for all of you, and that question is, of the 5 steps that you see up on this slide, which one do you think is the most important when it comes to the meat industry? Feeding? Feeding?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? I love a good debate, I'm not gonna lie to you.
Hey, a lot said feeding, someone said calving.
Okay, explain to me briefly on why you think feeding is the most important.
Without proper food, they're not getting enough nutrients into their
If
body.
they're not
They're not going to eat. Right.
Well, they're not born, they're not there.
Well, that's a very, very valid point, and you're absolutely right. But here's the unfortunate part. It's not really unfortunate. It's just something different to keep in mind. Even though all 5 steps are important, the driver to our industry are the retail sales. And the reason why I say that is because if we have no outlet for our product, our producers can't sell anything, which in turn, they make no money, if that makes any sense. And that's why it's very important, the background to livestock production and the impacts and effects of our practices on those retail products, if that makes any sense. And that's what I do here. This is why I'm here, is to try to help you understand, what is it that you're doing that is working. I mean, how many of you, since I can't see you, this is kind of hard for me to do, but I take a good portion of you have beef cattle. Either it's for a 4-H project, FFA project, whatever it is. How many of you raise high quality beef? Well, hell, I expect all of you to say yes. I mean, I would think it'd be terrible if you didn't. But my question to you is, if you want to raise high quality beef, have you followed your carcasses out to those meat packing plants or your local processor to know exactly what you're doing? And if you know what you're producing, then I challenge you to say, well, is this what you've aimed for? And is what you're doing on the live side, your practices, are they working? If that makes any sense. But the beauty about 2019 is that there's so many markets out there and so many niche markets that I'll tell you that There's a market for everything. So in going back to marbling, you know, you were when you said that there was intramuscular flecks of fat in between the muscle fibers. What if I told you 60% of the dollar value comes from marbling? Or quality grade, which is a combination of marbling and age of animal at time of harvest. But marbling plays a really big role. Can anybody just briefly tell me or enlighten me on why that is? Why do we put so much emphasis on marbling? Why does it matter?
Why do we want marbling?
Flavor. Tastes good.
Tender flavor. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what do you think is, if you had to explain to someone marbling contributes to tenderness and flavor, how would you explain it? I mean, if someone who didn't have a clue about it, how would you explain that to them?
Without the fat, it's not really going to be that chewy or like tasteful.
Ah,
Dry.
so you were on the right track. So here's the brief and the shortcut version. I mean, other than that, you got to take my class, you know, and I hope to see you someday so I can corrupt you then. But marbling, if you stop and think about it, it actually is less dense than protein. So what does that mean? That means that it's gonna take less energy, less force in that bite, that when you chew through it, it's gonna appear to be more tender. Does that make sense? So if you have more marbling, then it's gonna be more tender. Now, we all know that marbling is fat. What happens when we apply heat to fat? It's just like bacon, even though I know that's pork. So don't let me confuse you and me thinking I don't know what I'm talking about. But how many of you actually have to use oil to fry your bacon? I would hope none. You know, that's the same concept, because when you apply heat to fat, it's going to melt to a certain degree. So therefore, it's going to make that product juicier. And of course, fat is flavor too. So with a combination of density, juiciness, and flavor, this is where that palatability effect comes into play. So when we're talking about marbling scores, these are the marbling scores, the 10 marbling scores we currently have in the industry. As you see from the bottom right all the way to the top left, marbling increases. So at the very bottom right, we have what we call standard. There's less than 3% marbling in there. I think I heard somebody say, well, without that marbling, it's going to be tough and dry. You're absolutely right. That standard right there is going to be terrible, more like shoe leather, especially if you like it well done. But if you notice, there's a bar right above that, a red bar, and that above that bar is what we call select. That is about 3 to 3.9% intramuscular fat. And so in order to be eligible to grade in the United States, our beef carcasses have to have a minimum of select marbling, as you can see. And then the bottom left-hand corner, this is where we have our choice. Choice is broken up into thirds. We have low choice, average choice, and high choice. And then right above that, we have that sexy prime up there. Prime is also broken up into thirds. We have low prime, average prime, and high prime. And so part of what I do is I oversee the meat judging team. I don't coach them, but I oversee them. And one of the things that they will learn is how to grade as if they were a USDA grader. So they'll have to walk up to a ribeye and call these marbling scores as if they were a grader with a lot of confidence. I think that's the hardest part of it all. But as you can see, marbling will vary. So this is just another, here we have select marbling, 3 to 3.9%. Here we have our choice. If you notice, average choice and high choice are both highlighted in green. In our industry, we will often refer to average choice and high choice as top choice or premium choice. Reason being is because studies have shown, consumers have told us, that they cannot detect the difference between average choice and high choice. So they're often valued at the same price. And then, of course, we have our primes. And so as you can see, right in this, a colleague of mine down at Texas A&M did a study using ether extract to determine how much percent intramuscular fat, and primes actually start at 10%, and then it's an open window after that. And I say open window because now we're going to include dairy cattle. We're looking at Sakura, Kobe beef, and all that good stuff. So when you're looking at quality grades, and I know a lot of you have seen this, where you've seen USDA Prime, Choice, Select, and Standard, maybe even Commercial Utility and Cutter and Canner, you will never know the marbling score of that product. Now, 96% of our cattle today are very youthful, younger than 30 months. Actually, they average about 16 to 18 months of age here in the United States at time of harvest. So they'll be very youthful, very young. And so by the time that we take into account age of animal at time of harvest and marbling scores or degree of marbling, you will only know the overall quality grade, which is deemed as USDA prime, choice, select, and standard. 2 factors are accounted for in that quality grade. So let's do a quick run through here with that first picture of all these sexy ribeyes. As you can tell, I really like my beef. So can someone tell me this first picture, if you had to call that quality grade, what would you call it? And I'm going to do a process of elimination here. Would you call it a prime, a choice, select, or standard? I even gave you a little legend, a little hint over there.
What do you think?
Choice, absolutely. What about this next one?
Now, I was looking at these pictures.
It's obviously not prime, right? Do a process of elimination.
Standard.
Select, actually. See, but I'm the committee member here today, so whatever I say goes, right? What about this sexy beast? Yeah, no doubt, prime. And then one last one, the one on number 1.
That's standard.
Yeah, no doubt, right? Standard, that's terrible. And then of course that number 2 is going to be more of a choice. That's what I'm talking about. This is what I'm saying. It's very, very simple and looking at the big picture, but that marbling is going to be 60% of that dollar value. So now what do we do with all these cuts? Now, once we evaluate these carcasses between the 12th and 13th rib, well, now we have to really consider that wholesale cut. And now we, as I've mentioned, you know, we'll break it down by primals, and then we'll go down to subprimals, and then eventually retail cut. So let me ask you a question. Now, I briefly, and I know that I'm kind of going a little fast, but you know, I keep looking at the time here. But you, how many of you like your steaks, your beef steaks, well done?
Well done. Anybody? No.
Adriana, you like yours?
You
well
like
done?
it nice and brown?
Do we have some courageous people out there to admit to that?
We have one.
Good. I was going to ask you to exit the room. But well done. You know, how many of you like it medium well? I'll go easy on the medium well people. Faculty included.
Medium well for.
Okay, what about medium?
That's medium.
Medium rare.
Medium rare. That's a pig.
Lots of medium rares.
Good. What about rare? One.
One
What
or
about
2.
blue? No blue? All right. You medium rare folks, you and I can hang out sometime. You medium well, I don't know. You might as well just eat chicken while you're at it. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. So do you think degree of doneness makes a difference on consumer eating experience?
Yes.
Absolutely. So here's the thing, and I'm going to give you a brief rundown on how marbling plays a role in this. For those of you who like medium well or even well done and didn't want to admit it, I assure you that if you had a prime steak and you cooked it well done, medium well, that would assure that you would still have a good eating experience. If you had a select steak, and that's actually how I prefer, I purposely look for select, but I like mine medium rare to rare. And so I don't have to worry about that, you know, because I personally go for that iron, that metallic flavor of the beef itself. And I'm not really big into fat though. But the point here is that marbling combined with degree of doneness is going to make a difference on how well that consumer or how good of an experience that consumer is going to have. Does that make sense? Too many times people will blame the restaurant and say, oh, that was the toughest piece of steak I've ever had. I'm never going back. That's terrible. You know, they blasted on Facebook and tweeted and all this stuff, but they don't take into account that they actually ordered a well done. But then they may have also ordered a select or a choice. You know, there are just so many things to take into account. And that's why you guys are here, because you have to be our voices when we're not around. The other thing is when we're looking at tenderness, do you think that the whole function of that muscle will and can have an effect on tenderness? A locomotive muscle versus a support muscle. So a muscle from the round or the leg versus the ribeye or the strip. It only makes sense, right? And so we have to also take into account that, where did this muscle cut come from? Was its function for movement, or was it just support? So I'm going to give you two extremities here. How many of your parents actually would pan fry a brisket? Kind of ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure some people may do it, but I don't think they'll have a very good eating experience. And why is it that we smoke briskets or cook briskets long and slow for many hours, but then come a ribeye or a tenderloin or filet mignon we can put on the grill? Yes, there's a question there.
Yes.
Marbling?
Partially can be due to marbling, but the other part that often is not talked about is the whole function of that muscle. So there's a reason why that tenderloin, that filet mignon, so it's major muscle. There's a reason why that muscle is the most tender muscle in any carcass. That's because it sits right underneath that lumbar vertebrae and you're right up against bone, right? And so we know that bone is not very flexible. So that means that there's not very much movement in that, with that muscle. So that's one of the main reasons on why that tenderloin is the most tender muscle in a carcass versus an eye of round. If you ever notice walking behind a steer or a heifer, a live beef animal, or even a lamb or a hog, if you look at their round or their leg or their ham and you see that crease right on that backside, that right there is the eye of round. That's semi-tendinosis right there. That's one of the tougher cuts that we have, and it's only tough because it's constantly being used. So now let's match muscle cut, its function, to cookery method. We talked about a ribeye or a strip being, placed on a grill, and we wouldn't necessarily put a brisket in a pan or on a grill, right, with direct heat. All this is going to make a difference when it comes to consumer eating experience. Unless you're really mad at someone and you don't want them to come around anymore, go ahead and grill that brisket. Go ahead and grill that eye of round. Serve it to them well done. I assure you, you probably lose friends because of that. We also have moist heat here. This is where water is involved, and that water just helps that cut stay moist. We also have the microwave. Now, I don't recommend using the microwave as a means of cooking, more so to be used for reheating. But hey, everyone's different. Everyone has their way. We also have the convection oven. The convection oven is a really neat type of cookery method because it actually is going to cook, well, the idea is that it's going to cook everything thoroughly, evenly. So one thing when it comes to...
It looks like we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. So one thing that we have about cooking and palatability, palatability is dealing with tenderness, juiciness, and flavor, is that you have to understand the muscle. You have to understand the temperature at what temp we cook at. You have to understand the meat cut and then pair that to the type of cookery method, if that makes any sense. So one thing that I'm going to do for you is I have my graduate student, Jake, here, who's going to, who has cooked some strip steaks for you. If you want to come here and show them that we actually have strip steaks related to prime, USDA prime. We're looking at choice and then grass-fed. That grass-fed right there, I would deem it as a select. So what we've done here is we've actually already cooked the steaks to a medium degree of doneness. So that's about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And Jake has done a really good job actually coring. This is actually a core where he comes in and just takes samples of that product. And as you can see, this is what he's looking at right along here. Then he'll take that core and then he'll place it right along in that center. And what we're looking at here is a Warner Brasser machine. This Warner Brasser machine it mocks the human jaw. It actually measures the amount of force required to chew through that cut, through that sample. And so right up here, what we're looking at is pounds per force. So it took 6.68 pounds of force to just shear through that sample. So what we've done, normally whenever we do a Warner-Brewster shear force, we will actually take multiple samples here. And then we'll just add everything up and then divide it and then get an average number. Now I can tell you right here, my prime, actually the lower the number, the better, because that means that was less force required. If you take notice of my numbers, whole numbers here versus my choice and my grass-fed select, I can already tell you that my grass-fed is going to be the toughest one, whereas my prime is going to be my most tender, which then goes back to what we talked about. If you want to take an average of that, Jake, what we talked about and how marbling can impact tenderness. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So in my world, we will use people as for sensory, and then we'll use an objective means of measurement such as a Warner-Brewster shear force, so that because statistics play a big role in what we do in academia and research, then we have numbers to go off of to help us come to our conclusions.
All right. It looks like we have a few minutes left. Maybe right now we can open up for a couple questions. So does anybody have any questions? Sentinel, do you guys have any? It looks like there's a hand raised.
So does marbling, does that also come with age, with how much marbling it does?
Okay, say that again.
For marbling, does it matter the age of how well the marble is done? Like how
well, as far as age of animal at time of harvest, or the aging of the muscle cut?
the aging of the muscle cut?
Okay, so when we talk about aging, we're looking at dry aging and wet aging. And so obviously, as you know, dry aging is more just hanging out in an environment with about 65% humidity or a little more. And wet aging is actually in a vacuum bag, right? So marbling doesn't really have anything to do with that tenderization when it comes to aging. That has everything to do with the natural muscle enzymes that occur naturally that are referred to as calpains. Those calpains actually serve to kind of weaken the muscle structure of that product, which then results in it being more tender.
All right, Scioto, do you guys have any questions? No?
Okay, so my question is, what kind of occupations are available in the meat industry, and what kind of schooling do they require?
So that's a very good question, and I appreciate that because that's kind of what I was going to get at in a little while. You know, at least in my experience, I have a PhD in meat science. My master's is in meat science. I chose to go into academia to teach, to be a professor, to pass the baton on to others for their future, right? But you can also become a USDA grader. You can be a USDA inspector. You can actually work for export trade, a lot of export products and import products. You can work with biosecurity. You can go with product development with, you know, all these big food meat companies. Research and development, you know, if you're one who likes to put 2 and 2 together, maybe 3 things together and see what happens, you know, that's what we call product development and research. Something as simple as that. If it's very creative and artistic, and there's art in my world, believe it or not. Let me think, what else? Of course, I did mention like a meat lab, you know, maybe going into like butchering. You know, we have Ohio Wagyu here that I was actually helping, and 2 of my students currently are the sales representatives, and also help with a lot of problem-solving issues, cases that maybe their customers have. Let me think, what else am I looking at? That's roughly off the top of my head. But really and truly, the sky's the limit. I can't even begin to tell you, even like the culinary chef, you know, I really wish that there was more meat science involved with the culinary, because there's just so much to pick up here. So I think that's all I can say for now off the top of my head, but there is more to that.
All right, the students at Sydney High School asked, can you talk a little bit about the highest value cuts from beef, pork, and chicken?
Chicken's the dark side. I'm just kidding. No, it's not. So when it comes to beef, the tenderloin is actually going to be the most valuable cut. Again, it goes back to being the most tender muscle in that carcass. And the reason why it's the most valuable is because, again, the industry knows that if you're going to have a good eating experience, they're going to raise that price. You know, that value is going to go up. When it comes to, let me think. I think you said pork, right? When it comes to pork, that tenderloin is going to be the most tender. But when it comes to value, right now, you know, bellies are the highest value, but bellies and pork loins, they often trade off. But usually the belly is going to be the most, the valuable subprimal or primal off that carcass. And again, it's all about demand. When it comes to poultry, I would say the chicken breast would be. And then, but if you pay attention, if you flip that chicken breast over, especially when you're actually fabricating the chicken yourself, that fryer, if you flip that breast over, that's where that tenderloin is going to sit. And that is a very expensive piece because there's a difference in price when it comes to chicken tenders versus chicken nuggets. Those tenders are like the tenderloin. So I would say overall, chicken breast and chicken tenders.
All right. Is there any other questions? Oh, it looks like it's Sentinel.
What do you guys do with the meat that has E. coli in it?
Say that one more time.
Do you test the meat for E. coli?
Absolutely. That is a standard protocol that every meat facility has to go through that's inspected. Now, there's federally inspected and state inspected. We here at the Meat Lab, we're federally inspected, and all rules apply to us. Our meat lab manager is a retired meat inspector. So thank goodness we have him because he understands both sides of the arena, right? And so everything that we harvest here is going to get swabbed. And when I say swabbed, we actually have sponges that will swab the actual carcass to make sure that there's nothing that has been left on from the harvest floor. And then we send it off to a USDA lab to get tested for generic E. coli and salmonella. And if it's a ready-to-eat product, then we will get tested for Listeria monocytogenes. So yes.
Perfect. All right. So Dr. Lyda Garcia, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your passion and love for the meat industry and hopefully helping other people understand it a little more. So thank you guys. Thank you students, classrooms, teachers, everyone for joining us today. And if you guys have any other questions or would like any other resources for your classroom, please feel free to reach out to me and I can help you out and answer any questions. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.